This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just the way they've been to us. So with that, Alex, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today we're focusing on a place, and July 4th is coming up in a couple days. So we decided to choose America. So we picked a couple cities in the past. All the cities so far have been in the U.S. So we thought zoom out a little bit and just talk about the country as a whole in honor of July 4th. It was interesting actually thinking back on the movies and sort of my relationship with America, because I do honestly feel a lot of that for me was actually shaped by how America was portrayed in movies, or just consuming a lot of American film and TV, American media. Obviously they're going to have specific points of view on this country. And, I think that for sure definitely shaped a lot of my views of this country. And, also I feel it's been, a complicated relationship to say the least. I've never really been a blind patriot. Even as a kid, I remember in my grade school class, like one teacher that always, made her kids do the Pledge of Allegiance and salute the flag or whatever. And I remember even in second grade being like, that is kind of weird. And I'm so glad I'm not in that class, because something about that just seems kind of creepy to me. So, and it's not, again, not a thing specifically anti-American per se. I'm just definitely someone who's never really liked or trusted authority or venerating really anything. So, America is an easy then thing for me to kind of start questioning a little bit too, even as a young kid. Was a big fan of history and still am. So the more and more I would learn about the history of this country and the things that we did, good or bad, it definitely does, the more information you learn, then the more kind of point of view you can have. So, I definitely can say it's not that I've never said, oh, I'm proud to be an American, or, specific points in my life maybe felt lucky. I have okay, I'm lucky. I feel like I'm born here, but it's definitely not something that, I feel I have to feel or always have felt. So yeah, I think this is going to be a interesting episode. It was very interesting just to think back on some of these films for me, because again, it's complicated relationship.
I mean, I think we are of similar ilk in that sense that, to me, just the way your relationship with your family or whoever is going to be complicated. The same goes for your country as well, wherever you were born, So I, however, was not born in this country. I was born in India. So it's interesting to hear you say that your relationship with the US is shaped by movies as well, even though you lived here. For me, as an outsider who didn't live here for the longest time, all I had to really go off of and learn about this country was through the movies. So, however, it's obviously was a skewed portrayal in many ways, because I never really met or even been here or met anybody from the country. So for a while, it was literally all that the movies and TV shows taught me.
Interesting.
So it'll be interesting to kind of compare that. So I made sure that I kept some movies in here from that time. But then, I've been here now for 15 years or so. And so obviously there's a lot of, real life experience, and you kind of diving into the history, not as much as probably you have, but there's sort of real, hopefully some depth to my understanding of the country. But yeah, it's a complicated relationship, but it's also my chosen country, if you will. I also never really grew up with sort of huge, grandiose feelings of patriotism, even for India, where I was born. You sort of take things as they are and assess them. That's sort of how I've grown up. So there's good and there's bad in either way, in either case. But, I feel also very grateful. So there's hopefully a sense of gratitude that comes through my list as well, to be here and all that this place has afforded me. And I am who I am today in large part because of the people and the opportunities that I've had from this country, which I don't take for granted. So
yeah. Why did you choose to come here?
That will come through.
That'll come through. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I don't know actually if I've really ever asked you that. So I'm curious to find out those answers.
Yeah.
Cool. Then, so speaking of lists, why don't you start us off with your number three movie that shaped your view of America?
All right. So my number three is American Pie from 1999, starring Jason Biggs, Chris Klein, Jennifer Coolidge, a whole bunch of people, directed by Paul Weitz and Chris Weitz. And the quick log line is four teenage boys enter a pact to lose their virginity by prom night. Easy and simple. So I put this movie on my list because this movie, when I watched it, first of all, it came out when I was in that age range,
Yeah.
if you will,
Yeah,
a
me too.
teenager,
Mhm.
exploring everything, right? But I think I put this movie in because it represented and represents that sense of freedom, that this country and this culture affords, even though we can be very sort of, having lived here for so long now, we can be sort of tabooish and weird about sex and what have you, or being frank about various things. So there's often this interesting debate between Europeans versus Americans.
Mm,
That said, from where I grew up, from my vantage point, having a movie that's all about youth, finding yourself, exploring a sexuality, having a very frank relationship about all these matters, with your friends, where you can even have a
mm.
goal like this to, lose your virginity before you graduate, or to have the great relationship that Jason Biggs has with his father
Yeah.
in the movie, like,
Yeah.
which I get it that not everybody has that, but he's, we just did our dad's episode, and
Uh-huh.
he would definitely be in the top movie dads ever.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, totally.
yeah, so all of that was, age is very refreshing, but it still is in many ways, because not many places afford you that kind of, frankness, if you will. And then I would say this movie, as as a teenage kid, if you will, living outside, this was my view into what life at school possibly looked like in the
Mm.
US, which is probably true, probably not true. A little bit of both, but what people wore, the way their dorm rooms looked like. I was very surprised and intrigued by how no one ever took their shoes off and just climbed into bed with their shoes on. Like silly details. I remember
Yeah, yeah.
noticing all of that. Like, how did the homes look like? What have you? It just felt, I mean, I know it's a movie, but it felt sort of real to me in that
Hmm.
regard. Like, it was my view into the world here. Because I guess it just hit me at the right time. Watching this movie again in preparation for this podcast, and I hadn't seen it in a very, very long time. Obviously, not all of it holds up, from the non-consensual broadcast of
Yeah.
that situation,
Yeah.
and Jennifer Coolidge getting it on with Finch. I don't even know
Hmm.
how old Finch is in that movie.
18, I think.
18.
Right,
I
they're
mean,
graduating high school, so it's
yeah,
legal. It's
st-
probably legal.
it's legal but still problematic, so
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
some of that stuff. But at the same time, if you strip away the raunchiness and the silliness of what have you, I think it's a very sweet movie. There's a sweetness to it. There's an earnestness to it in terms of the relationships between the friends and the dad and Jason Biggs, like we talked about, and also kind of finding love. Like, I love what happens with Allison Hannigan and Jason Biggs's
Oh, yeah.
character. Where sometimes what you think growing up, especially as a man or a boy, and finding sort of your person and what have you means may not be. And also that women are also sexual, and it's not just a boys thing. So I
Hmm.
love sort of how that storyline comes together. The relationship between the boys is great. Chris Klein, who I think I had a mild crush on for sure when I watched this movie way back when, like his storyline of being this sort of perfect looking jock guy, but then exploring his vulnerability
Uh-huh.
and such. Like, there's some like sweet earnest moments in this movie. I mean, today this movie would probably be a crappy Netflix movie. So I'm actually glad that this movie exists, and it did amazing, and is a full franchise in its own right, which is kind of bonkers. Wouldn't happen today.
Right.
So I don't know. I had a good time revisiting it, rethinking about me in that age frame, watching this movie again. So yeah, that's my number three, American Pie, which forever will represent, teenage youth, freedom of exploration that I do associate with America.
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say the things about the film sort of feeling honest and truthful, because I saw this film when it came out, again, similar age to you too, where like the ages of the kids in the movie were basically my age.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually kind of fun following them through the franchise too, in terms of the different, life
Yep.
stages they were going through at the same time. But, looking back on this film, it is actually very interesting how realistic I also feel this movie was. Like you have a group of friends, but they're not stereotypical, like the jock guy, the nerd guy, the
No.
popular guy. They just all seem like real people. That
Yeah.
some, maybe one guy might play in the sports team, but he's not like the jock. So they felt like well-rounded characters, and the
Mm-hmm.
banter and the relationship between them, that group of friends, just felt very realistic.
Yeah.
Which you won't, especially in the 90s too. Like if you think back on TV shows like 90210 and
Yeah. Very glossed up.
very glossed up. The actors in those shows too. It's like, oh, I'm 18, but the actor's like 27.
Right.
And in this movie, they're young kids.
They're
Like
kids.
they're teenagers, and I think there's definitely a lot of truthfulness that comes through. And there is a sweetness to the film too. So I think it's a good. I like that you chose this film too, because I think it is yes, it is a teen sex comedy, so there's going to be those things in there too. But if you strip all that away, there is something that is very honest about what a teenager, at least similar to my teenage experience, in terms of with a group of friends and the stuff you talk about and the banter that you have back and forth. So yeah, it's definitely also a little bit of a time capsule of like late 90s with like the soundtrack and the clothes and everything.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Nice little taking me back to 1999. Even so, something was funny, like there was there's a scene where they're kind of going through and showing, I think it was where they have like the webcam that's recording the girl taking her clothes off or whatever, and they're showing the different people's households like watching it, and there's even someone, they have like a pet monkey for no reason. And I was thinking back, like, yeah, and for some reason in the 90s, pet monkeys are just like a thing that was like, oh, and Friends, they had one in various movies.
Yeah.
Just like, I don't know why that's a 90s thing and why that kind of went away. But it was like, oh, wow, they had a pet monkey in this movie too. Like such a crazy thing. So, which I don't think is necessarily representative of the average American household, even in the 90s. So, we didn't have pet monkeys. Actually, maybe in India, there were probably more monkeys wandering around than...
yeah, but no pet monkeys and no monkey brains served on the platter at dinners either. So
Right. But
out there.
yeah, I just thought that was really funny with Pet Monkey. But yeah, I didn't see this film in probably like 20 years or 15 years, and it's still funny. I mean, other than like, yeah, there's some stuff that's a little problematic, but then again, it's teen sex comedy. Like it's
right.
There has to be kind of problematic things in there, or else it's not a teen sex comedy. So I'm not like gonna judge the morality of American Pie, but yeah, I did. I think it did capture a lot of the zeitgeist of '99, and I think you really hit on in terms of the authenticity of the film. So good. I think a good choice. That as someone who was a teenager in 1999, I think it was a good kind of truthful-ish slice of what that was like. Slice American Pie, no pun intended.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that this felt relatable to you, even though you grew up here, because I never knew how far off this is from like actual real life. So that's good to hear. But having gone to grad school in this country, I do think there's something very specific about the American school experience, which shameless plug, we will have an episode on our school lives coming up at some point later this year. But there's something very specific about that. I've been to school now in multiple places, including obviously India, but China as well. So few programs in Europe as well. And I think there's something different about the American school experience, which I don't know, maybe there's something about how people engage with each other and also their teachers. What roles do parents play at that time? Because this whole concept of you're 18, so you're a grown-up now, and you sort of leave home, this doesn't exist in a lot of places. So you're in those transition years where your relationship with all the people in your life is sort of changing in a very dramatic kind of way. Where I come from, if you're not married, you live with your parents till 30. So
I see.
It's a very different kind of growing up. So I don't know, maybe that's something that plays into why the school experiences is so unique in the US. And it sort of shapes you, who you are, the kind of friends you make, the kind of relationships you have, which probably is true anywhere. But I think because you're a lot more independent out there,
Mm.
exploring yourself, exploring who you are with other people of your age, I think it has like a different impact on the choices you make from there on out. Versus, I think in a lot of other countries in the world, your parents still play a very big role in the choices you make as an adult because, you're just with them.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think it is also a thing that is part of American culture, that spirit of going off on your own, being independent,
Right.
going back to the whole like yeoman farmer myth from our
Yeah.
foundings. And I think that is still here in the culture for sure. And I think you're hitting on one of those things that, yeah, there's transition periods in your life where like you're supposed to go off and do something on your own
Hmm.
because that's part of, the fabric of America in some way.
Right. As opposed to other places, I mean, now I'm sure things have changed, but when I was growing up, like that was almost looked down upon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how dare you leave your home and
Right.
your parents, and go do your own thing and find your own identity and individuality. You can do that, but within the confines and bounds of the family structure.
Right.
So,
Right.
no judgment, but it's just different.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, I've definitely felt that, when I see and visit other cultures, there's I think more of an importance put on community and family than maybe we have here in the United States, where it's a lot more on
Yep.
the individual. And yeah, like going off, you have to go off and find yourself in some way.
Yeah.
Which yeah, I think this movie is that a little bit too, right? Like it's they're setting a bet with each other to go off and accomplish something
Mhm.
on their own in competition with one another, instead of the group, helping each other try to, accomplish the task. They're not working together.
Totally.
They're in competition with one another as individuals, which is kind of the same theme that we're pulling apart here, just
Yeah.
within the American consciousness.
Yeah, and not to mention the goal being getting laid, which also would not be a goal in a lot of cultures
Mm,
before you graduate.
yeah,
Or if it would be, it would not be spelled out
true. Yeah, no,
and
that's totally true.
discussed this way for sure.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Yeah, I love how we spent basically 20 minutes talking about American Pie with in a very great dialogue. Like this is interesting. Yeah.
All right, what's your number three?
Cool. So my number three is The Longest Day, a movie from 1962, directed by Ken Anakin, Andrew Martin, and Bernard Wicki, starring.
Same movie, basically, like American Pie, pretty
Right. Yeah,
much.
basically the same movie.
Same,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's cast of big cast of a lot of big names, but among them John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, Richard Burton, Rod Steiger, and Sean Connery. The IMDb plot summary: the events of D-Day told on a grand scale from both the Allied and German points of view. So I picked this movie to start with, as it's a representation of a lot of the World War II films that I watched as a young kid growing up, and I feel
Mm.
that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and definitely World War II was still so much so in the public culture.
Mm.
There was the generation that fought in that war was dubbed the greatest generation, and there's all this like throwback to World War II and what America was doing in that war, and sort of we're great because we were involved in winning that war, and in a way
Mm.
kind of, you're sort of taught that we were the only ones that sort of won it, and they kind of leave out the part that the Russians basically more so defeated the Nazis in the US. But this movie was a movie that I watched a lot as a young kid. Actually, around 4th of July, sometimes I would put it on, and because it's a big, long 3-hour movie, it was fun to watch around the holidays. But yeah, so for me, I think because growing up, the pride in America and what it meant to be an American, to me, was so tied up in World War II, and the victory that we had in that war, and the militarism of that war, and our sort of power overseas, which was, I'd never really thought about it too much actually until, quite recently, how much that did leave an impact on me, and that's how I sort of viewed America, as basically just the country that won World War II. And this movie, I think, was a big part of it. And, so the film, like I said, is epic. Huge cast. All these people are real people. So you're learning about the history of what the U.S. did, and it was an incredible accomplishment too. All the planning that went into the invasion. I think it spends about an hour before it even gets to the actual D-Day invasion. So there's a lot of like how we are smart and we're tricking the enemy. So it's not just about our military power; it's also our intelligence and our smarts. We're kind of outsmarting the Germans. So it's again, I think nowadays there's a stereotype, sort of America's just strong kind of bully in the world, and it's just kind of dumb but very powerful. And what this movie does, I think, is try to paint the picture of like, no, like we had a big army, but this is a very hard thing to do. This was not a sure victory whatsoever. So I always just loved that, like that build up to the invasion, and then when it happens, it's this very realistic tone to the whole movie. It doesn't feel like propaganda either, which a lot of these World War II movies, even nowadays, kind of starts to turn into that. This film was made in 1962. So, a lot of these people, actually, the cast members who are in the film fought in the war. I think even some of the people, there's a couple soldiers that like play themselves even in the film.
Oh, wow.
So I think that kind of helps, like, because they actually lived through it. They don't kind of go back and try to paint too rosy of a picture of it. It definitely is, like I said, very, very realistic, and painted to me this picture of the U.S. is great. Because we, fought in World War II and won. All the sacrifices you see, some of the characters you get to know, they get killed. So you're feeling like, wow, like we kind of gave up a lot. We sacrificed something for the rest of the world, is sort of the feeling you kind of get from this. So you feel good about, oh, wow, America, like we accomplished something hard, using our brains and our brawn. And we sacrificed. It wasn't easy, but we did it to free another country. It wasn't like the Germans were invading the US. So there's that feeling that military power can be seen as altruistic, which, as a kid, again, that was something that I believed. It was fun rewatching it too. I hadn't seen it actually a couple years, and I remembered almost like lines from it. And because again, I watched it so much as a young child, it was really fun to revisit it, and it still holds up incredibly well. I mean, some of these scenes of the D-Day invasion is just huge. I mean, all these soldiers, and it was all practical. This wasn't like a Saving Private Ryan CGI thing. It was just incredible. In a way, actually, I feel it was more powerful than the Saving Private Ryan scenes because of the
100%.
scale they capture in this. Is just like, whoa, like you really believe this stuff is going on. But I really like this film. I think it still holds up well.
Yeah. Now, first of all, I'm just impressed that you were watching this movie as a kid, and that too, like over and over again. That's pretty impressive.
I loved it. I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how many kids had that experience. So that's pretty incredible. I'd never watched the movie. I'd heard about it, but I was very glad to watch it. It didn't feel that long, even though I was intimidated by the length to it. And everything you touched on, like it's just brilliantly crafted, and feels real. The stakes feel real. And you're right, like often war movies, even though they might be brilliantly crafted and mounted, they become either propaganda films, or they become too melodramatic, or they become too messagey, or what have you. Maybe there's something about the length of the movie you're so kind of submerged into it, that it sort of helps in a way. Like if this movie was shorter, actually all those sort of things, the problems that we touched on will become more apparent, I think. And it's also fun to see all these great, Hollywood actors appear in these roles. Like I'm not that familiar like you are with the World War II history, only to a certain degree. So I don't know the back history and such of the people involved. Some, maybe a few I had heard of, but mostly I hadn't. So to have these Hollywood, icons sort of come in and bring flesh and light to these people, that was pretty cool. I'm sure that means even more to you because you know who these people were in real life. The only person that I felt sort of took me out in the moment was Sean Connery. I'm like, what are you doing?
One of his early roles, like one of his pre-Bond. So this was, he was not a big guy at the time. You didn't like his part?
No, it just took, that felt very movie-like to me, that, we're in a war zone and such, and yet I'm going to be sort of, funny and crack jokes and what have you a little bit. which not saying people wouldn't do, but
Hmm.
Sean Connery also not a good actor in my mind, never
Oh,
was,
okay,
you
okay,
know. I
okay.
mean, the movie we discussed last time,
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade was
Yeah.
probably one of his best, but that's like, towards the end of his career.
Hmm.
He does a he's movie star person, in
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
mind, not an actor. Versus everybody else in this movie is a movie star and an actor. So I
Fair.
think that
Yeah.
stands out. The other thing I noticed was, and this is some kind of silly to say, but because it's a black and white movie, the initial part of the movie before the invasion happens, even though, German people are speaking in German, there's subtitles and what have you, but at some point, the uniforms start to blend in. The little kids on both sides start to blend in. And
Mm.
I am not, even though my dad was in the army, in the Indian army, so I have some relationship personally with the armed forces.
Hmm.
I've never really been, a war person per se. As much as I love, World War II history and World War One history, all that
Hmm.
stuff is amazing and very intriguing. But at the end of it, what I'm left with is just thinking about how young these people were,
Oh yeah.
mostly on both sides.
Hmm.
And yeah, they've been, they're doing a great thing. They're excited to do this and such, but at the same time, they could be spending their time doing something else, on both sides. So it's not lost on me. As much as you appreciate and you rara the victory and everything, I can't help but I not think about the other side and just the harms of war. And
Yeah.
I think this movie does a pretty good job by not being messagy about it. At the same time, because you're so submerged in these humans and their lives, that the weight of those sacrifices and the weight of the war itself is on your shoulders as you're watching the movie throughout, and
Hmm.
only sort of ratchets up as you go through. So yeah, but great movie. I'm so glad I got to watch it.
Yeah, that's a good insight. Another thing I think this movie does well too is that it shows the Germans as real people too. Like they're not
Yeah.
cartoony villains, or
No,
you're
except for one guy who's the pilot. I'm like, why are you talking
oh
the way you are? What is
yeah.
happening? But
Uh,
everybody else feels pretty normal and real.
yeah, but then it also in a way then makes it more if they were cartoony, it's like then the victory that the US and the Allies would have would sort of somehow seem less not
Earned.
earned. There we go. Yeah, less earned because you're just fighting cartoon villains.
Right.
So I always liked how you were seeing the Germans as real people, understanding what decisions they were making, with all the subtitles too, added some gravitas. So I think
Yeah.
that also makes it a step a little bit far removed from propaganda, though, you can make the argument that every film, especially about war, is propaganda on some
Sure.
level. And I definitely can see some of the things I pointed out earlier in terms of shaping the US is always the good guys and all these sort of things. This war definitely made me feel that, or this movie definitely made me feel that way. But yeah, it's definitely could have been a lot more like on the nose propaganda. And that's what I always appreciated about this film.
Yeah. Totally. And that on that point of like the Germans, even the generals and such who want more support from the Führer, and
Hmm.
they're not getting it because the Führer has gone to sleep, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And I thought those details were very important because those guys who are fighting the war on those side, do they even know why they're in it? Do they even
Mm.
believe in it? Maybe, mostly not, So that's the thing about war, is that it's usually a few people at the top and their madness and their machinations
Hmm.
that make everybody else dragged into it and pay the price for it. That's just my
No,
opinion.
totally. No, yeah, we should do an episode on war maybe at some point. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot we can pull apart here, but
Totally. All right, my
cool.
number two. So speaking of dumb bullies and having a lot of might and power and cartoony villains, or villains that are not given too much agency, my number two is Independence Day from 1996, starring Will Smith, Bill Pullman, Jeff Goldblum, a whole bunch of other great people. Directed by Roland Emmerich. The quick log line, I'm sure everybody has watched Independence Day, but here it is. The aliens are coming and their goal is to invade and destroy Earth. Fighting superior technology, mankind's best weapon is the will to survive. So, watching this movie growing up, especially not living here, like this movie to me represented sort of America's might and power, number one country. And this is like the 90s coming, hot off of the 80s. So there's like big money, everything is big and loud and what have you. And this is what this movie represented to me. It also represents sort of the big Hollywood blockbuster movie complex, because I at that point was not watching American classics or indie movies because they weren't available overseas. So all you watch was disaster movies or movies targeted at families or kids. So Dunstan Checks In or Baby's Day Out and Independence Day,
Dunstan
all fun
checks
movies.
in, huh?
I know. Watched several times.
Nice. We'll have to do an episode
it.
on monkeys maybe at some point too.
Yeah, so this is sort of what represented movies to me from the US. But even as a younger person watching this movie, as much as you're impressed by the might and the planes and sort of the do the right thing and bring it all together and we will prevail, you're impressed by that and you root for all the people. But at the same time, I remember having complicated feelings about why are the aliens being punched? Why are they even here? Maybe they're here for a reason. Or why is the American president taking charge of the entire earth to make this battle about, the whole planet, which it is, but then where are all the other leaders?
Yeah.
Why are you the only one sort of doing this? And I was still pretty young and not really into politics or what have you, but I still remember feeling that. And of course, as I've grown older, not that I watched this movie over and over again since then, probably not, these feelings have obviously sort of, grown as time has gone by. And for the longest time, that was one of the impressions I had that, yeah, this is a very powerful country that has all its might and, smart, good people, of course, but is not afraid to just take world matters in its own hands and do what it thinks is right. And sometimes that's good and has to be done, and other times it's not. So you got to sort of unpack that and deal with it. So that's sort of what this movie represents to me. That said, though, very entertaining movie, especially when I watched it when I came out, watched it many times since. Movie star performances across the board, Will Smith especially. I mean, so good. Bill Pullman, Jeff Goldblum, like so many of these people's personas, I feel like owe a lot to this movie and what it did. Brilliantly made. Special effects sort of uphold now, some don't, but a lot of them actually do hold, especially the whole alien ship taking over.
Yeah.
It's an iconic thing. Like when I lived in New York a year ago, I remember on a rainy February night, I was walking around and just happened to be in front of the Empire State Building. And it was sort of cloudy and kind of rainy, and all I thought of was, oh gosh, what if an alien ship just landed?
Oh,
happened. So it's it is, say what you may about big blockbuster movies, and I can sometimes have complicated feelings about that because they're so mass. But the flip side is that they do have that kind of everlasting impact on you because they are part of pop culture. They have like this shared connection with people all over the globe. This movie transcended everywhere, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, that's my number 2, Independence Day.
Nice. Yeah. So this film, I saw it also when it came out in the theater. Definitely was excited by the trailer. I remember liking it, not loving it when I first saw it, and then I think it was just the age I was at of like, oh, this is dumb. And then I didn't like it for many years. Oh, this movie's stupid. It's just silly. And then I kind of came back around to it, be like, yeah, it is dumb and silly, but that's kind of the whole point of the movie. And now I can, watch it and find it very entertaining, actually, despite, the kind of stupidness of it. And it was actually fun watching it again for this podcast because, it's on TV a lot. It's very watchable.
Yep.
I've seen it in bits and pieces over the years. But yeah, it's interesting you say about the, what you kind of took away from it, of this impression of like America as the only power kind of taking over the world. Because definitely for this rewatch for the podcast, I was very much focused on, okay, what is sort of the themes? What is this movie trying to say, even on purpose or just not on purpose, which I think a lot of the best propaganda actually is non-intentional.
Right.
It's just whatever's sort of in the
Just
culture at
comes
the
off.
time. Yeah. And I think this movie has a lot of that. The US military is how we win.
Mhm.
Our military might. It's also used as a defensive force. We're fighting against the aliens. So it's like our military, which has is usually only used offensively, especially in like the 20th century. Like we start more wars than America's not attacked. Like we attack other people. And this movie has, oh, look, the military is great because we need it for this defense of these
Yeah.
aliens. And then you even talk about, you said, oh, why are the aliens coming in the first place? And there's that line in there of like, oh, they're here to like, take our natural resources or something, right? They can move from planet to planet. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like America, which was founded as a colonial nation that took resources from people that were
Right.
already here and basically raped and pillaged this land, and that is moving on, with our armies around the world trying to do the same thing. I'm like, well, so
Right.
we're basically the aliens. So it's kind of ironic, I guess, that America's fighting against basically a version of themselves. There's also a lot we mentioned about earlier with American Pie around this feeling of individualism being such an important
Mhm.
thing too. And if you look at this movie, the government doesn't actually is not victorious. It's an individual private sector cable operator guy who cracks the code,
Right.
not some giant government agency with all these scientists. No. It's an individual on his own doing it. And then again, Will Smith, an individual fighter pilot.
Right.
And they're the ones actually who defeat the aliens, not the entire U.S. government, which is helpless. It's helped us so much so that like the aliens show up, and it's not like in other films where the government's like, okay, we have to respond and we're going to evacuate people and we're here to help and try to. No, they're nowhere. People fending for themselves. The government is useless, which definitely was a lot part of the culture here in the U.S. in terms of
Right.
being
At that time.
anti-government agencies. Yeah, exactly. Starting in like the 70s.
Yeah.
Then you get the classic trope too of the Vietnam War vet.
Mhm.
Vietnam War, obviously one of the wars that we fought in the 20th century and lost. So there's this feeling of in movies especially where we have to somehow go back and the soldiers have to win because we lost, and they feel guilty
Exactly.
about that. And in this movie, he fought in Vietnam, he lost. Now he's the one who gets to go defeat the aliens, so we can give
Right.
a pat on the back to all those Vietnam soldiers. Say, actually, wait, no, you lost that one, but we're going to give you a win and let
Yep.
you defeat the aliens. And that was definitely a theme in a lot of movies in the 80s and 90s. It was funny to see that kind of come back. And you even get to like the sort of anti-hippie sentiment,
Oh
which
yeah.
ever since the, basically after the Summer of Love, 69, 70, like everything in pop culture has to be anti-hippie. The hippies
Right.
always have to be crazy and stupid and wrong. And in this movie too, the hippies are like, oh, we got to love the aliens, peaceful love, whatever. Boom, they all get killed. And the
Right.
aliens, the people who are aggressive and want to start wars and are pro-war and pro-fighting, they're the ones who actually, are right. Um, which is definitely another theme in a lot of American movies, especially around
Yeah.
this time. So I think there are a lot of a lot of it is propaganda, but I don't think intentional. But you can definitely read the culture, especially in the 90s, about how Americans
Right.
view themselves and view these other things through the lens of this film. Again, I was very paying close attention to it on this watch. I thought it was surprising actually how much some of this
Yeah.
came through.
There's a lot of layers and still relevant, right? Like in
Oh
many
yeah.
ways, we are in the thick of gun control and such, which will always, I feel like, will be a theme when
Mhm.
when anyone ever talks about America. That'll always be a theme. So, there you have it. Even the president, who's sort of depicted as this, handsome young, baby on the hip kind
Mhm.
of guy, who's hip and real and thoughtful. Like I was thinking about this, there's so much of our image of like what is presidential is
Mhm.
from the movies, which probably should be
Mhm.
another episode that we
Yeah.
should take on. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, does it have to be that way? I don't think so. It
Mhm.
depends on what work you're doing. And like you said, the government isn't doing much actually. So
No.
what worth is, a handsome, dignified, thoughtful president if there isn't much work happening?
Well,
So,
well,
it's interesting.
he was a fighter pilot. So again,
Right.
militarism wins. It was not necessarily that he's able to have the government respond in any
Right.
particular way. It's the military, and he himself is a pilot. right? So it's again very, very pro, not military in the sense of, you know, militarism. It's definitely a movie that is saying that that is the right way to go, which you're right. I mean, we still have that in this country today. I mean, it's a very strong part of, even going back to my longest day choice. I mean, I think militarism and the army is woven into American culture. I mean, maybe this is everywhere too. I mean, I don't want to.
I mean, it's
but
one
definitely
of
is here.
It's one of the currencies that, defines your power and status for sure. One of the biggest ones. So, so that's why. World over, it does make sense.
Yeah. One other thing too, I thought was interesting to your point earlier about why is it only the United States? And there's even, in terms of responding, and there's even this line in there where the British are like, oh, about bloody time the Americans are here, like saving us. Like the world is sitting there just waiting for the US to come in and save us or save them. I think that if this movie were made today, I don't think that would be the case. I think there would have to be here's like the Chinese government. What are they doing? Like they definitely would do that. And I think maybe that's a reflection on America's loss of confidence in their own power in a way, is having lost a couple other wars like Afghanistan and Iraq. So we're taking more L's. And then maybe I think our confidence is come down, where even the films then have to, this would not, people I think today, if they saw this set up in a movie where like the rest of the world's sitting around waiting for America, be like, this is unrealistic. Like, come on, like where's these other military powers? So I think that also speaks to the 90s, having just come after quote unquote winning the Cold War, we're the only superpower. We kind of rested on those laurels for a little bit. Thought that was interesting and a good point that you brought up earlier.
Yeah, which is why, we talked about the movie Arrival earlier. Like that is sort of revisionist kind of movie, right? Where there's actual dialogue literally with the aliens to understand them. There's a lot of international kind of policy and leaders and such. So, which is why it's a great double feature actually. So I would highly recommend watch these two movies together.
That's a great point, because that movie was not about like the military was sort of viewed as the bad guys in that movie a little bit, right? They want to shoot, they want to bring the alien ships down. The scientists are sort of like saying, wait, no. So it is almost the exact opposite of this movie. Big government science programs are the ones that actually solve the puzzle. So not a cable guy.
Not a cable guy
in this movie. But again, still fun. I'm not,
still fun
knocking the film, but I do think the politics are very interesting stuff at play here, for sure.
Totally. All right. What's your next?
So speaking of politics, I guess my number 2 is Fahrenheit 9/11, a documentary from 2004. Written and directed by Michael Moore. The log line from IMDb: Michael Moore's view on what happened to the United States after September 11th and how the Bush administration allegedly used the tragic events to push forward its agenda for unjust wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I would remove the word allegedly from this. I'm actually going to IMDb today and try to edit that, because that's inaccurate. This film is important to me in a lot of different ways, and I think especially with views on America. I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, so I would turn 18 around 2000, and really became like more, actually you're involved in politics, you can vote. So I was always political in this, even as a kid, but this is when it really ignited the political side of myself around this time, and especially the Iraq War specifically, and the September 11th attacks. And even this film starts with the 2000 election, which George Bush stole illegally. And that was the first election I voted in, and immediately saw, okay, well, this system clearly doesn't work, because the winner just stepped aside for this other guy who was appointed by the Supreme Court to lead us. Like, that's fishy, and this is no good. So I was immediately becoming jaded, like in my first election, seeing it be a stolen one, which what this movie, I think, starting there is good in terms of what it covers. But definitely the Iraq War is something that I was against from the beginning. As a college kid, I sort of saw through, the lies of what was trying to, the Bush administration was trying to do. And I think this movie does a very good job of kind of building the case for why that, that war was illegal and was wrong. And I was always also a huge fan of Michael Moore for a very long time. There was a show he had on Fox called TV Nation that I watched as like a very young kid. Maybe I was like 13, 14. And that was my first exposure to him. And I was like, oh, I love this guy. Like, I love how he's using, humor to make political points. I would buy all of his books and read them and see his movies. But this one for me, just because of really captured the mood that I felt at the time to America. Like I said, I have a troubled relationship with this country for sure. And this is definitely a movie that represents, encapsulates all a lot of the problems that I do have with our country, the things that we've done, using our power for evil instead of good. What can happen when, evil people are put in charge of, the most powerful country in the world, what they can rot on other nations is very alarming. So I think, this movie is, Michael Moore does a great job of, showing the downsides of a democracy, because democracy is, the people deciding things, and sometimes the people are wrong. Sometimes they're hoodwinked by their leaders who are tricking them, which is what happened here. I mean, I was in the minority of people at the time who was very much against, the war, even in college. And I remember, not necessarily, it was sometimes hard to kind of speak out about it because you felt that was, being anti-American. It was actually, I studied abroad in the UK during this time. And it was after the war had already started, but that was the place I was able to feel the most free to criticize America, and even participated in this major protest in Trafalgar Square. It was actually kind of cool. They set up a statue of George W. Bush that we all got to tear down, like the Saddam Hussein tear down thing, like chanting, like, we want America to stop. And that, it's funny. Like, I felt more like of an American in terms of expressing my freedom of speech and my dislike for what the country is doing, being abroad, than I even did in the country, just because of the mood that was going on at the time, which, is actually a pretty amazing Michael Moore. I mean, not amazing, but I think a good side of America is we have a country where, even though we're doing these evil things and the government is evil and everything, a filmmaker can still make and release this movie. Other countries with dictators or systems of government, he wouldn't have been allowed. Maybe would have been put in jail. But this movie did come out, or worse. Yeah, this movie did come out. It was a gigantic blockbuster sensation. Still the number one highest grossing documentary of all time by leaps and bounds. It was a phenomenon when this came out. So I saw this film twice in the theaters. And I remember the first time I saw it, it's a very moving film about all the things that that is going on, especially with the US soldiers. And like my girlfriend at the time, like she cried after the end of the movie, and there was this other woman sitting next to us who was like bawling, and her son had been killed in Iraq. And she was just like, basically, like, I can't, it's sort of like her eyes were open for the first time to be like, wow, he died literally for nothing. And, we had, I was there comforting her, like, yeah, like, this is horrible. Like, he did die for nothing. But just seeing that sacrifice that her son gave for no reason just made me even more angry. I just remember like, how can, we be sacrificing all of our soldiers for no reason, for this lie that the Bush administration had put on the world. So, I think, again, it was even hard for me, honestly, to go back and watch this film. Like, I couldn't get through a lot of it because it just makes me so angry. And brings me back to this time period of like the early 2000s, like after, 9/11, and just what the United States wrought on the world after those events were just absolutely horrifying. And it just still makes me mad to think about it. And just puts me in a very angry mindset to even go back to that time. So it was hard to rewatch this, but I still think it's incredibly effective. Michael Moore is just an incredible filmmaker. How he sets up the cast of villains in the beginning, showing them sort of getting ready for the camera. You introduce each of the people in the Bush administration, and it's clear he's trying to say, these people are just putting on a show for people, the American citizens, and lying to them because they're all actors pretending that Iraq was a threat and that they had these weapons and that we were right to go in there, which we clearly didn't. So I think this movie is very important to me in my relationship to the United States, even to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine watching this movie when it came out, being in this country, given everything that was happening. I had not watched this movie until, in preparation for this podcast in its full length. I'd seen bits and pieces of it. Obviously, familiar with everything that sort of went down. But it was hard watching it for sure. Because it's not only all this for nothing, but also everything that happened with 9/11 was also brought about by the same people, you know? So it's just very troubling and twisted in that sense. And it took me back to that time when I was still in India and thinking about, what has happened? What does this mean for the world? How can a thing like this even happen in the US, which up till that point was sort of touted sort of as invincible, like nothing
Hmm.
could happen. So in India, we've always had this sort of thing with Pakistan and, all sorts of
Right.
war things, and my dad being in the army. So it's sort of been in the culture. And to then see that happen and at such a grand scale over there, and then months and years of, I remember reports of, oh, they're looking for this and they found something, or they didn't find something, or blah blah blah. It was always sort of this background chatter
Hmm.
on all news channels all the time. I remember, no matter where you lived. And I just remember sort of having this sinking feeling that, is this how civilization is going to end, that we'll
Mm.
just keep sending people trying to find stuff? So yeah, which doesn't exist. So yeah, troubling to watch the movie, but like you said, the movie is very effective. I do think watching the movie for the first time in its entirety now, given what we know about documentary filmmaking and such, though effective, it's also a little cartoony in a way.
Mm.
And maybe that's by design. I don't know. Like if this movie was made today, I think its tone and such and feel would be a lot different. I think it'll be grimmer, it'll be hard hitting, but maybe that's to its credit that it sort of sneaks up on you. It sort of feels kind of cartoony. It's explained in a very sort of dumbed down, brought down way, which is probably the point, to make it, reach as far as it possibly can, make it very effective. They aren't kind of, hard to follow storytelling devices being used. It's a very simple storytelling kind of that he
Hmm.
uses, and often cartoony, like I said, but very effective regardless.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been his style. And again, I think maybe why, as a young kid of like 12, 13, I gravitated
Right.
towards him and his TV shows and how he talks about politics and talks about issues. There is I mean, he definitely can get very serious. And there's moments in this movie that are very, hard to watch and serious,
Yeah.
but because of that light tone and that comedic tone that he can put weaving throughout the rest of it, it is like an entertaining watch, in terms of how he portrays, even the bad guys in this movie, like Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. There is sort of like a silliness to it, and
Yeah.
two, I think his style of filmmaking and definitely changed documentaries forever. I mean, and to your point, in terms of if this was made today, I feel like there's so many movies that have come out after this, like documentaries, that basically are cribbing his style. That because this movie was such a hit, that it's like going back to the genesis of a new form of how documentaries have evolved in the last 20 years. Going back to that, this is the point that this and Bowling for Columbine too. I think that movie is also a huge hit,
Mhm.
though not as big as this one. But I think his style is now this style. So it's interesting to go back and see the genesis of that. One other thing I will say too that was interesting in rewatching this is, the parts that I could get through it without feeling too just sad and depressed, is something I actually didn't realize at the time when I saw it, is that it's very US centric.
Mhm.
And maybe again it was because you're in the middle of the war that was still being fought. The second half is about how the horrible cost of the war, but mainly on Americans. Oh, here's some sad moms whose kids are dead. Here's soldiers, American soldiers that are wounded. And yeah, obviously that is sad, but there is no mention of the toll that we put on the Iraqi people. I
Mhm.
mean, close to 1 million people we killed over there is
Mhm.
I mean, official estimates a couple 100,000, but there's also estimates of over 1 million. And there's no mention of that. It's almost like the tone of the film is, oh, this is a horrible thing that Bush did because of what he inflicted on like Americans. And it's really, to me, and as I've evolved my thinking to be a little more international in the last 10 to
Mhm.
15 years too, and looking at America and kind of taking a step back, it's like the toll it is way worse on the rest of the world. Like, yeah,
Totally.
again, it's sad that soldiers died, but we started the war.
Yeah.
And these are soldiers that signed up to go and fight in this
Yeah.
war.
And they are from everywhere.
They're from everywhere. The Iraqi people did not sign up for this. They're innocent civilians getting killed by soldiers on purpose a lot of the
Mhm.
times, in terms of the war crimes that we committed over there. And like, it's just interesting that the movie doesn't really mention or put any focus on the pain we inflicted on Iraq. So in a way, I feel like maybe if the film was made today, that would be more of the coverage, or maybe Michael Moore's lens is just very US centric.
That's the thing. And that's probably a little bit of what I see him as. Like, it's a little bit of like gotcha kind of attitude, which I don't know. As much as I found the movie very effective and him also very effective, but there is a part of me that views him in that kind of gotcha kind of way, which makes it a little bit almost selfish in a way,
or immature.
his,
Yeah, it's
and
like
immature from his point of view, and
Mhm.
he comes off as a little silly and clownish. And first of all, don't show yourself in a documentary. I don't actually want to. There's no
Well,
point
yeah,
seeing
that's
you.
his style.
That's
But
his
yeah,
thing. Yeah, but
I get
it
it.
all adds to that, and I think it's
Mhm.
connected to what you're saying, that
Mhm.
if somebody mature were making this, it'll have like a broader point of view. That
Mhm.
said, though, this movie was made in the thick of its time, right?
Right,
So
right,
it's hard to kind of point fingers at somebody that, oh, you just made this about here. I
right,
get it,
right, right.
because it was in the thick of it, and America was on the hot seat,
Mhm.
So yeah.
Mhm.
So my number one, it's quite a kind of a left turn from this conversation that we were just having, but it's Working Girl from 1988, starring Melanie Griffith, Harrison Ford, Sigourney Weaver, directed by Mike Nichols. Quick log line: when a secretary's idea is stolen by her boss, she seizes an opportunity to steal it back by pretending she has her boss's job. Not the best log line, but yeah, factually correct, but there's a lot more than just this.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but yeah, I put this movie as my number one because to me, this movie signifies the American dream. And the American dream is not all just, bed of roses and peaches for sure. But I think, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be without its own costs, but this is still a place that lets you even have that dream, whether that dream is valid or no, whether you would even end up in the dream that you dreamed of, whether you would even like the dream if it came true. Those putting all of that aside, the fact that you can even dream a dream and pursue it, I think is very American and is not, I don't take that for granted. There's a reason why people for centuries have flocked to this place, and despite all the problems that we've been talking about, the government and what all sorts of things, I think this is the only place which has sort of created that kind of framework and foundational structure that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can come in here and kind of pursue a life, and we keep evolving our thinking on here. There's forever and will always be dialogue about immigrants and equality and hyphenated citizens and all of that. We'll keep wrestling with that. But as an outsider, I can say this, that this is more of a place where I could come in and find who I am and pursue my dreams than the country I was born in. I've lived in Europe. I've spent time in other places in the world. You know, every place has a lot to offer, but I think this is a singular place that can sort of make you feel mostly at home, and you can pursue what you want to pursue. Is it going to be easy? No, absolutely not. But life isn't easy. No matter where you're at, you're going to be singled out or bullied or put down for
Right.
some reason or the other. But
Mhm.
as compared to everybody else, this place still, kind of supersedes in my mind. And to answer your original question of why I chose to not so much come here, but stay here, is that reason. And I think this movie captures that very beautifully. I think this movie is a
Mm.
great movie about ambition as well, where it doesn't apologize for its ambition, but it really puts you in the point of view of the lead character, which played by Melanie Griffith. On You see the wheels turning, you see what is happening, and you can make your own judgment about, is she right to have this ambition? Is she right to steal, quote unquote, steal the idea, which by the way was her own idea to begin with?
Mhm.
Or is she okay to put her friends and Alec Baldwin on the side to pursue her you can make your own judgment about that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of the brilliance of Mike Nichols. This is, I think, the brilliance of the script. And I think it's the brilliance of her performance. Like, what a great casting. Like, anybody else in this movie would, I think it'll be hard to kind of navigate this movie. Melanie Griffith is not your typical leading lady.
Mm-hmm.
She's not sort of likable in the classic sense that you would want your leading lady to be, but I think that's what works. Like, you, she kind of straddles this line of being ambitious, being flawed, but yet you root for her.
Mm-hmm.
You see, there's this makeover happening, but it's a much bigger internal makeover, which is sort of coming from within as she's progressing and proceeding. So I just love that. And then, it makes broader commentary, especially as you get to the end of like, okay, you got the office. Now what? You're
Mm-hmm.
still a cubicle in the giant building. And even the bad guy, which is Sigourney Weaver, though a bit of, a caricature sort of performance and role, especially towards the end with the crutch and, all of that
Mm.
stuff is a little comical. At the same time, she's also just a cog in the wheel. She's also trying to sort of just save her own cubicle. It's on a higher floor, but it's still a cubicle, so, or an office. So
Yeah.
I think it kind of makes that broader commentary on, yeah, you can be in the rat race, you can be ambitious, but where does that actually take you? What is the end to it? And what is the cost of it? Which I think is the flip side of the American dream and growth and capitalism and such. And there are other societies that, maybe tout being at peace with who you are, being more internal, being more grounded, puts those philosophies at a higher plane, perhaps. But what I take away from it is that, you have to make your own choices. It's I'm okay being ambitious, but yet having perspective that this ambition and the meeting of it is not going to solve everything.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that just because you end up with the office in the building, you don't act anymore, or you don't even have dreams anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You got to keep pushing. You just have to have perspective that that's not the be all end all. There's more to life. You don't have control over everything, even though you may at moments think you do. But I think that's sort of what, to me, how the movie lands. Last thing I would say, great Harrison Ford. Like, Harrison Ford
Oh
is
yeah.
the sex pot eye candy in the movie, and I
Uh-huh.
love that how he's put here, and such a movie star across the board. Like, it's I've been watching a lot of Harrison Ford through our podcast, and
Mm.
I didn't watch a lot of this when it came out, and I just can't imagine this person being in a bajillion franchises, doing movies like this one. What a great career! What a movie star!
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's my number one working
Nice.
girl.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I mean, I saw actually I never heard of this movie and then saw it in
Oh wow.
college in a film class. Like it
Okay.
just and I was like, oh, okay, what is this? Like I just watched it and was just blown away by how amazing it was. Just across the board, like performances, Mike Nichols, incredible job with directing this
One of
thing.
his best, I think.
Oh, definitely. And I think this is one of the, if not the best encapsulation of this whole idea of the American dream,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of taking it apart too, in the sense of, there's part of the idea with the American dream is, our system is a meritocracy. If you work hard, you can
Right.
get ahead and succeed. And this movie is saying, actually, no, like
Oh,
she worked really hard. She went to night school. She has
yeah.
all these, but they're like, no, you're the secretary. I don't care how hard you worked. Doesn't matter. You're never going to get promoted. We're not
Even
going to listen
got
to your
better
ideas.
jewelry. She even
Yeah,
got a haircut.
right. Totally. And the only way she can get ahead is by cheating and lying and stealing, to climb that ladder, pushing another, there's a lot of gender politics in this, which we
Oh
don't
yeah.
necessarily have to get into, but she to win as a woman, you have to stab other women in the back. And even
Mhm.
Sigourney Weaver's doing the same thing. It's like,
Oh yeah.
there's no sisterhood there, right? She's stealing ideas from Tess. So it sort of then tears that apart of like, well, it's not really a meritocracy. You have to cheat to get ahead. And then it's an individual journey that you're on. And I think the ending of the film, which you hit on, of like that last shot, just absolutely brilliant when it pulls
Mhm.
back and it's like she's just another cog in the wheel, You
None
did
of
all
that.
these things to get what? The hollow success that comes with capitalism. But there's also that scene too when she, calls down to her old secretaries, and they all cheer and said, "Oh, she did it," and they're all like,
Mhm.
"Yay!" And it's sort of like it's like one of them got out,
Yep.
but it wasn't ever like she's reaching her hand down and saying, "Okay, great, now I succeeded, so I'm going to start like this program to bring secretaries into the world." Like she's now just another, I think maybe even going to turn into another bad boss like Sigourney Weaver. It's
Or
like she could
not,
be on that journey.
or
We
not.
don't know. But the fact that it was her individual success did not help anyone else around her succeed. It's like one of us escaped. That's great, but we're still toiling down here. And again, that's I think a comment on how our system works too. Is it's not about individuals then helping and bringing other people up with them. It's like you succeed on your own, and that's it. And that's part of the price of the American dream too. It's not about the collective. It's not about the
Yeah,
community. It's
it's
about the
very
individual.
individualistic. Yeah.
Very individualistic. So I think that the ending of this film is because like, Mike Nichols is totally brilliant. It's a crowd pleasing moment that makes you
Hmm.
happy for her, but at the same time is so dark and cynical. I feel, especially that
That's
last
it.
shot. It's just like both sides are being represented there. It's just absolutely brilliant, and why I think Mike Nichols is just an incredible filmmaker.
One of the
Any
best.
anyone else would have just gone with the okay, this is a fun success story to show, and it would have been treated as a 100% good thing in terms of what she accomplished instead of this like it is good but at what cost question.
Hmm.
I also think the opening is just so brilliant too, with the Carly
Oh.
Simon song. You see
Hmm.
her like coming across the ferry as like
Hmm.
New York immigrants were coming through Ellis Island. It's sort of making
Yep.
that commentary too of like, oh, she's an immigrant from Staten Island to Manhattan to try to make it in the big city, much like people like you said for 100 or so years have been coming from around the world to the US to try to quote unquote make it. And that's what I think the movie is trying to say. Hey, she's just a representative of all the immigrants, not just from Staten Island. So I think that is great too. So I just really, I think this movie is fantastic and a great choice for commentary on the American dream.
I'm glad you're so favorable on it. Yeah, this is one of my all-time favorites. I
Yeah.
watch it probably once, if not twice, every year. Because and that's the thing, right? What we are just talking about. Even though you know that there's like a darker edge to it,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, if you really, really zoom out, what are we as humans on this planet for anyway? Like, we're going to die, we're going to get plundered by, you know, environmental things or an animal on the street or what have you. So, in some ways, what you can really control is your individual path and whatever ambition you have. And yes, it's crowd pleasing, but ultimately that's what you come back for,
Mm-hmm.
and because there's something about that of sort of dreaming it, no, regardless of where the dream puts you and what that cost might be. And then the other thing about sort of the gender dynamics, and we're obviously not fully suited to have a deep conversation about that, but it made me think to your point that yeah, all the women who probably made it or people from minority backgrounds who made it, they had to do this more individually, just like the not the majority background, classic white male, they did that too.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has to kind of fight their own individual journey. But what changes is when there are more people who made it and there are more examples of people who made it, then the equation changes a little bit. Not to say that those people will build a system to pull the rest of the people up, most likely not. But if you see more people who made it from whatever representation area there might be, that changes the equation, I think, as opposed to if you just see one or two.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I always think about that as more evidence on a false promise that that the system works, and that I actually think it's dangerous when you start focusing too much on the representation of the few success stories that there are and ignoring the
Yes.
fact that the system needs to change. The system needs to be burned down and rebuilt, and that is a way that the people in charge, I feel like, sometimes can mask the
they
inequalities of the system to begin
That's
with.
the other side of it, for sure.
So
Yep.
it's like I think this movie plays with both those things so
Yep.
well, and which is why I think this movie is so great because it works on both those levels,
Yeah.
depending on kind of what mood you're in.
Yeah,
If you just want to enjoy the ride and the success, and you can feel happy for Tess and be like, oh, or if you're approaching it more in a serious, more like maybe cynical mood, you can look at this movie as a biting, commentary on the destructiveness of the American dream and the false promise and how it, is actually a really bad thing.
Hence a masterpiece and will always sort of be evergreen.
I agree. Love it.
All right. What is your number one?
So my number one film that represented or shaped my view of America is JFK from 1991, directed by Oliver Stone. Cast, very huge, deep cast. Kevin Costner, Gary Oldman, Tommy Lee Jones, Donald Sutherland, but just countless other folks. And it would take me probably 10 minutes to read them. Arguably, I feel like this might be the best casted movie that has ever been made. Okay, so the plot summary here. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison discovers there's more to the Kennedy assassination than the official story. What this movie does so well is, capture both the promise and the optimism of what America could be with its power, but then also question the things that it has done. And I think this encapsulates both my feelings of, and shaped, honestly, both my feelings of questioning this country, being upset about the things that it's done, but, having an optimistic side of, well, the promise is still good. Like what we say we want to be is still a noble thing that we should continue. We're definitely far off from that. But we should continue to move in that direction and try to encapsulate the promise of what America is, but that you have to fight for it. It's not going to come easy. The forces of the darker sides of America are going to be stronger, and you have to fight against them to overcome these things. And I think, again, this movie definitely shows that. It puts Kennedy sort of in this film. Oliver Stone has him represent the promise of America, what America could be, a good use of its power, and that because he was then a threat to military and the CIA maybe wanted to use America's power for, he was killed. So this movie is definitely putting forth the case that Kennedy was killed by, the CIA, either officially or unofficially, which is something that, I do believe was what happened. Maybe it was because I saw this movie a billion times as a young kid or not. But, I do believe that that's a good thesis. And I think, even though there's some arguments to be made that the way that Stone portrays Kennedy is not necessarily historically accurate in terms of what he probably wouldn't have ended Vietnam and all these things that happened after, if he had lived. But the fact that he didn't live, you can then have this alternate history, basically, of like America as a force for good in the world. And I think that's what Kevin Costner, who puts incredible performance in this film, is wrestling with. Like, he can see what America, he loves his country, he loves what America can stand for, and is horrified by realizing what America has done to Kennedy, which, again, you can kind of view as what America's done to the promise of what America maybe should be. So it's having that feeling of, you love it, but then you can still criticize it and be disappointed in it and be mad at it. But at the end of the day, you still, he loves his country. I mean, he says that many times in the film. And I think that is, again, something that how I wrestle with that too. I said a complicated relationship. I mean, I think that's definitely something that I think of all the time. It's like, I do love the promise of what we could be, but at the same time, I can't just ignore the horrifying things that we have done. Some of the things we've talked about already in the other film. And then for sure, like one of the seminal moments in this film of Donald Sutherland as Mr. X, kind of explaining the quote unquote truth of what America's actually been doing to Kevin Costner to push capitalism around the world and U.S. business interests over anything else. That scene definitely shaped my view for sure of like, as a young kid, I was probably like 12 or 13 when I first saw this film and just like religiously would watch it all the time. That scene felt like, it was a hidden secret of like, whoa, is that really what's going on? Like, as a little kid, you sort of feel like Donald Sutherland's talking to you and telling you like, well, I didn't learn about this kind of stuff in school, or like, why is this not talked about? So that film definitely started, that scene and this film definitely started a lot of my questioning of the narratives that was being taught. The ending of the film too is just brilliant. How, Kevin Costner again has this amazing speech about summation of, what he thinks about America. There's even this part when he says, like, he's talking to the jury, but he's like, oh, that we have to uphold the promise of Kennedy and stuff. And that's up to you. But he's like literally looking directly into the camera. Right. And Stone's trying to say like, okay, people like in the audience, you now have to fight for what you believe America should be, which is definitely something that, spoke to me. And, why, even though sometimes it's really hard to deal with all the negative things that we've put into the world, our job, I feel sometimes as American citizens, to fight back against that and try to push for us using our power, which is, still immense. We're still the only superpower in the world, for good. And I think that's what this movie is trying to say. And then also a meta commentary too, like this movie did actually change things. There was a law that was passed in Congress to declassify some JFK documents earlier.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. Yeah, this movie is epics of epic. I'd watched it before and was really, really fun. Well, not fun, but great to get back into it in preparation for this podcast. Everything you hit on, yeah, how it's made, how it's mounted, how it's acted across the board, it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, there are many reasons why this movie would not be made today, and but also maybe this is sort of the pushback around this movie as well. As powerful as those two scenes are, they're also kind of in the preachy sort of vein, and which is sort of the point, I suppose. And maybe that's some of the backlash that this movie has faced too over time, or even when it came out, perhaps. So I don't know. There is a part of me that I feel like this movie would be even more effective if some of those scenes were actually cut short and just more economical. But at the same time, I can't take away from, a 13-year-old Alex sitting there watching this and being blown away and questioning everything and sort of, shaping. There's a lot of power in that for sure. And I'm sure that meant a lot to many, many people when this came out. And again, to what the point that you made, even with your last pick, that the fact that a movie like this can be made in this country is pretty amazing, right? Like the power of free speech and putting what you think should be done out there in such a big epic way with these grandiose speeches and monologues. It's pretty incredible. It won't happen in most places on the planet, actually. So I think there's a lot of power there. But yeah, that's the one thing I was thinking of, is that this movie would be even more effective if some of those things were just cut short or shown, not told. But I think that's not Oliver Stone's style. There's a lot of telling.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely is someone too, is one of my favorite filmmakers, and definitely, like, as a young kid, he was, one of my two favorite directors, and this movie being my gateway into Oliver Stone. Yeah. But he definitely is a very earnest filmmaker. He has a very specific worldview that he's wearing his heart on his sleeve, essentially. And that definitely does come across sometimes. You can read it as like preachy or trying to push like a specific, again, like,
yeah, because in my mind, you don't even have to say all that. I mean, say a little. There's so much that's been shown that I'm already feeling it, like this is all these systems don't work. It's all sort of garbage. And you have that heartbreak moment, but then you also have this newfound excitement that, okay, what are you going to do about that? Are you all just going to sit back and twiddle your thumbs because things don't work? Oh, boo-hoo, right. Get up and do something about it. So you're already feeling it. I don't think you need grand speeches. You need a little bit. It's not 15 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I actually only now watch like the director's cut of this, which I think is even like 20 minutes longer than the theatrical one, because I just can't get enough of this movie. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I think, because he's trying to fight against, I think, just the other propaganda that had been, so ingrained in the culture that, for an audience, I mean, maybe he's not treating the audience with the intelligence that maybe he should, right. But he definitely is trying to like push back against a, decades of a, the classic narrative of what actually happened. And then not only whatever happened too, it's like what the US was going through at the time, like from even the opening 5 minutes. I love that, where it's like a sort of talking about the military industrial complex and why we were involved in these different things. And, it wasn't really about, fighting communism per se. We were involved because we wanted to, help American business interests and all that, basically support capitalism, not necessarily try to quote unquote free other people in these other places. Like even now, like it's not about freedom at all. It's about freedom for our businesses to exploit people in other countries. That's the freedom we're fighting for. We don't really care at all about democracy around the world. Like that's kind of a joke, I feel like, that we keep telling ourselves. But yeah, no, I think it's just trying to push back against
yeah, that. And sometimes you need a little bit of a propaganda tone to fight back propaganda.
Yeah.
So there's some of that's happening as well. But yeah, this movie is brilliant. The other thing I was thinking of is that, and you made this point, that Kennedy sort of really stands for the American dream.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the place where I would have probably done a little bit more literal translation, because, he's not perfect either. I don't even know if this is what he stood for, maybe. And so it becomes so much about the pursuit of sort of making sure that Kennedy's legacy lives on. And I know a smarter audience will translate that, but for the cynics out there who don't believed in him
Hmm.
or what have you, I think the movie would be a lot stronger if that at some point you just moved beyond that and made it more about the country and the people.
Yeah, yeah. I think, that to me is because this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it is, well, also a movie that I would consider perfect in every way. But the one thing I think that, Stone doesn't do a very good job, and it's exactly what you kind of hit on. It's like he is hero worshiping Kennedy. And maybe look, like he went through that time, like he lived through that. So maybe that was his 10-year-old self or whatever, idolizing the president who, again, at that time he was seen as, oh, this young president with good looking family, and the future of America is now in this guy. And I think that is the case. The case he's trying to make for what Kennedy represents, I think, is kind of faulty. Like, as someone who also loves American history and understands exactly what really was going on there, like he's making some leaps that I think are not defensible in terms of what he's trying to say, what Kennedy is. But I think he just can't get over, as in his own mind, I think he just worships Kennedy so much that it comes across in that. I mean, some of that stuff that Costner's saying at the end too, like, oh, he was our king and you worship but I'm like, okay, this is a little bit, like, okay. I mean, again, I'm swept up in it and I'm like, oh, like I'm crying when he's saying all this stuff, but it's like, no, it actually, like, we shouldn't be venerating Kennedy in that way. But I think what the movie is using him for as a vessel for a promise of a better America. And yeah, maybe he gets a little bit too much with hero worship. I mean, no, he definitely does. I don't say maybe. He definitely does do a little bit too much hero worship, but I just get so swept up in it. But I agree with you. Like, it would have been a better case, like academically, if he were to do something different here, but he just can't escape, clearly his love of JFK. But
which, I mean, I get, right? Like, ultimately, any piece of art or what have you is going to be from a person's point of view. So, that baggage or what have you is always going to loom on it. But yeah, that aside, this movie is amazing. I actually wish and hope that somebody would actually do a bit of a re-edit of this movie, perhaps, to kind of for that academic purpose. Because I want more and more people, especially in the young generation, to watch this movie. But I think, A, given its length, and B, given some of the things that we've talked about, it could probably be just like a non-starter for so many people. So if this is sort of maybe a different cut of this movie, which is not 20 minutes longer, but actually 20 minutes shorter, with some of those things kind of adjusted just a little bit, I just think it'll be super relevant, without a question. It still is to me and obviously you, but I think it'll be even more relevant.
He did make a unofficial sequel that came out this year that is a strict documentary, though, where he's going over more evidence that was unlocked because, again, of this film, where he goes into much, much more detail on proving why the CIA was the people who did this. There was no way it was Oswald. It's I mean, I just love the Kennedy assassination too, just to learn more about it. It was a fantastic film. I know it's different than what you were just saying, but because it's not a narrative, it's a documentary. And but I would recommend, it's JFK Revisited, I think is the title. It's really, really well done. Anyway, cool.
Check that out.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other films, were there any other movies that did not make it onto your list?
Yeah, I had a few. Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street, In America, Bridge of Spies, A Few Good Men, and actually many, many more, because this is such a rich topic. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. Like, very long list. Other war films: Gettysburg, High Noon, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Born on the 4th of July, Showgirls, Wall Street, The Godfather, They Live, Team America: World Police, Avatar, and Blue Velvet. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at America, especially as like a citizen, to slice it. But I think starting with this, maybe we'll do a sequel to this at some point. But I think this is a really interesting overview. for both of us, and fun to, again, to hear from you, just in someone who didn't grow up here, and how you looked at America and consumed the media and how that influenced you was really interesting.
Likewise, yeah, for me the opposite. So yeah, this is really great. And listeners, I hope you guys enjoyed this too. I'm sure there are many people who are tearing their hair apart while listening to this, because this is one of those topics, but that's okay. And we hope that you like us, subscribe to us wherever you check out podcasts, and we are very curious, what movies come to you guys' minds as you think about this topic, get ready for your barbecue on 4th of July and such as well.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.